let's maybe begin by talking about the early seeds of what brought you to writing and spirituality, because these are seem to be two themes in your life.
How far back do you want to go?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be, linearly biographical, but, it's just like the most important elements that really informed your writing and spirituality.
Because not in jest, but I wanted to answer by, we could go back many lives maybe or something, but we're talking
this lifetime.
We're talking this lifetime.
Yeah.
I don't know, because, I really think sometimes people go into the arts, it's sort of there from the start, and like I was the kid who would write little plays and get the kids in the neighborhood to put it on. We'd do costumes and then charge a quarter for everybody to come, so we're talking early in that sense. But as for mentors, I started I first studied theology, because the two poles of my life was always spiritual and creative. And I think my real challenge has been, which I'm only now really getting around to, is integrating those two poles. But my first year majoring in theology, I read a lot of philosophy and world religions, and I realized I couldn't honestly say there's only one God and that's a Christian God. So I thought I can't really stay in this field being an agnostic. So I switched to drama, which was a hobby of mine. And I went into drama with the same kind of passion as one goes into religion. It was only the god was Thespis or something, And I went to New York. I acted in, I guess, about 60 plays, Broadway, off-Broadway, television. And then it just suddenly stopped. I was doing something for PBS television, and the joy wasn't there anymore. The Eros wasn't there. It was like, I knew it was finished, but I didn't know what the next step was. And I went to a wedding of a friend outside New York, and there happened to be an astrologer there. So he said, I'll do your chart, because we had 2 or 3 days there over the weekend in the wedding party. He knew nothing about me. And he said, well, I see acting there, but it stops, and your next thing is writing. And writing is really what you're meant to do more than what you've been doing. And I said, that's amazing, because I have stopped acting, and I wasn't sure what. There was like a 3-month period where I really wasn't sure what to do next. So I started writing plays, and I had about 10 plays produced. And then that brought me to Hollywood. Where I was, one of my plays was optioned by MGM for a movie, and I started writing movies. But what might be interesting, the context of what you're doing while working in Hollywood, because the first project or two was my own project, but started getting assignments. Someone else would choose, and I would write it. And little by little, I think like Ariadne, I lost the thread of who I was and what I was about. And I just had to stop. I went to India. India's been a big part of my life spiritually. And I just went through a rather dark period for about 4 years where I didn't write. I call it my underworld, my Persephone years. And I realized, there's something, for those of us really interested in spiritual evolution, there's something when you go astray that just shuts down, and it won't let you go too far, and it sort of pulls you back to some authenticity of soul. And I had a dream. I've always listened to my dreams and written them down, and been very interested in Jungian psychology. And the dream was a dream of a pregnant woman, 5 months. So I counted ahead, and I realized September 2000 would be the 9th month, and that something new would begin in my life, but I didn't know what. I was invited to lecture at a writing conference, and I had lunch with a woman who mentioned that she was in a school called Pacifica Graduate Institute. I had never been to Pacifica, even though it was 40 minutes away from me. And when I heard the word Pacifica, the energy of the word, I knew that was my next step. So I called, and they said, tomorrow's the last day to sign up. I don't think you'll have time to get all your references and papers in order. I said, oh no, a dream told me I'm sure I'm supposed to start September. And so September I enrolled in a graduate program. Now this is after having taught graduate school for 20 years. I didn't mention, but while I was a playwright in New York, the New School asked me to teach playwriting. So that started a kind of parallel career of writing professionally and teaching writing, which continued at USC in graduate screenwriting. So after teaching graduate school for 20 years, I became a graduate student. I sort of did things reverse, you know. And in a totally new subject, mythology, with a focus on depth psychology, which is Jungian psychology and post-Jungian, like James Hillman. And I had no idea why I was doing this. I just knew it was right. And over the years, I've begun to trust intuition more than rational brain. So out of this journey came a new way of teaching. I offered the course I wanted to do to the universities I had taught, but it sounded a little too woo-woo to them. And I ended up being invited by Esalen Institute in Big Sur. Esalen, no stranger to new things. And I called it The Way of Story. Because I felt we've become lopsided, living only in our heads. And for the real writing to come to serve the soul, you have to integrate head and heart and something deeper. So I do these workshops now at Esalen and America and abroad sometimes, and that gives craft. It gives left and right brain. It gives craft of writing for all narrative forms of writing, but it also brings in intuitive writing, like channeling, and emotional writing, writing from feeling very strongly rather than just literary or rational thinking. And the response has been incredible. I've been so excited just to see people just open, parts of people that have been shut down since they were kids suddenly just flower within 2 days. So I continue with the writing workshops, but the other thing that's come out, and it came out from my own kind of trauma of working in Hollywood. Another course I launched called The Power of Story. I should preface this by saying that I found I had become fragmented, and the more I went into it, the more I realized it's perhaps not just a personal feeling or experience, but a collective one today, how we've become split apart, really split. And hence, in that gap of split, depression, substance abuse, violence, all kinds of things. There was my spiritual side. I've probably gone 32 times to India, and there's a very great sage I had the privilege to meet and work with over the last 3 decades, and Sri Advayananda. And instantly, this is just a synchronicity. Sri Advayananda's father and guru was Sri Atmananda, Sri Krishna Menon, who was the guru Joseph Campbell met and influenced Joseph Campbell. You can hear about that in the Bill Moyers Power of Myth interviews PBS television did. And Joseph Campbell was one of the inspirations for the school I went to, Pacifica Graduate Institute. So you see how it's all interconnected somehow, in spite of ourselves. And So after teaching writing for over 20 years, and now with the new training with the graduate degree in psychology, Jungian psychology at Pacifica, I got the idea that a lot of the exercises I created for writing might apply to psychology and healing trauma, the idea being healing trauma through story. And the kernel of my approach is that perhaps it's not the individual trauma that is the problem in the life, but the way in which we think about the trauma, the story we create about the trauma and about our own lives. And when the story gets imprinted, say an abused kid who is abused will have a victim scenario and will recreate that pattern throughout their life. So we launched it at Esalen, as you know, and I remember after the workshop having one young woman who was now 34. She had been something like 15 when she was sexually abused by her brother and then her brother's friend. And now all these years later, now she's 34, she says after this few days, she felt like she had herself back. She had been returned to herself. Now it wasn't anything I did. I was a catalyst. It was the exercises, the soul dialogues. It was recreating her story to the artist. And they think it's not practical or pragmatic. Well, of course, there's nothing more practical than serving soul and keeping your soul alive. So I realized what I processed from my own individual experience, the fragmentation I spoke about a moment ago, is that I had reached a point that I couldn't go on in that way. Everything seemed to shut down. I'd try to write in the old way, and I'd fall, and once I fractured my wrist, then I said, no, I've got to snap out of it because I have this Puritan work ethic. And I'd sit down to write, and my one-year-old computer would blow. So I finally said, okay, I get the message, it's not time, because some deeper inner work had to go on. And the inner work comprised of, I had gone to India very early and done, sadhana work or spiritual work and Advaita Vedanta, the Hindu philosophy behind the religion. I mentioned in the beginning I had left religion at the age of 17, and there's a wonderful saying in India, it's all right to be born in the temple as long as you don't die there. So in my belief system, I think religion is a starting point for higher philosophy. So the work became somehow integrating. There was my spiritual work, my discipleship with this great sage. I was a wife and then later just a mother. I have a son. And then there was my teaching and my writing. There were all these components, but they didn't overlap. They didn't connect. And I had this image of, like in the Middle Ages, when you're drawn and quartered, they used to tie your arm to one tree, another, and then pull you apart. And that's how I felt when I just took this time out from writing, from working. And I realized if I'm to teach or write, it has to be as a whole person. In other words, I have to come to the plate as my spiritual self, my human self, my intellectual and emotional, the whole banana, And so I teach from that viewpoint. And I'll have someone, like I just did a workshop this weekend here in Ojai, and I had one woman who's very, very bright, and she wrote a monologue, and it was all very rational and logical. So my acting training would come in, and I'd get her on her feet, and I'd do an improv with her, where it would force her to emote, to bear feelings. And then I'd have her do an improvisation from the feeling place. And of course, it was like leap years ahead of what she wrote, because she had brought her whole physical and emotional body to the work. So that's kind of what I'm about in the teaching world, and and I just see I think what we forget is what we go through personally, and we think it's just us. It is a collective. We really feel a collective. I know these last few years where we're sort of under the shadow of Pluto in the world globally, I would feel things in my body and I couldn't understand what they were. And this is what people who are a little psychic and artists often are feel. And I'd realize it's not something to do with me only. It's a global thing, and we're feeling it. We're feeling a shift. I think we're seeing the really deconstruction in a chaotic way of the old patriotic paradigm, and the tiny beginning of the return of the feminine. And when I say return of the feminine, of course I don't mean feminism or anything political, but the return of the feminine that's necessary for both men and women. That those aspects that have been suppressed and overcome by power and greed. And with the return of the feminine, the sense of interconnectedness will come back. Now, modern day physics tells us already we're interconnected, that everything is. But it has to kind of spread to our daily human life and political life. I'm sort of all over the place. I don't know if I'm answering what you...
That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's maybe spend a little time on the spiritual side, its development and your marriage and your time in India, because it obviously played a great role in your development. And so wherever you want to...
Oh, okay. Well, you know, I'm a product of the mid-late 60s. And you either marched in Selma or you went toward metaphysics. I did a little of the civil rights, but metaphysics won in my case. And I was 19, and Raja Rao, a noted Indian philosopher, Hindu philosopher, and novelist, came to campus to talk about Hinduism and Buddhism. And the first moment I saw a poster with this photograph, I knew I had known this man all my life. This was, you know, some old memory awakened. And anyway, to cut to the chase, as we say in Hollywood, when I was 19, I married him. We were married in Paris. My family was very much opposed. I was disinherited for about a year. And it was a major upheaval. Now, I'm a Texas girl, so you can imagine. And he was the first Indian I had ever seen. I mean, you don't even, at that point, you didn't see many. Now, of course, it's very different. So we were married in Paris, and I realized it was out of my quest for truth what drew me to him, because I felt he had answers I was looking for. And he was a disciple, as I mentioned earlier, of this great sage, Sri Atmananda. And so 3 years after our marriage, we went to India, and he took me to my guru. But I was very independent, of course, and I said, I'm not, just because that's your path, it may not be my path. So, you know, I need to find my own. But I knew I was looking for answers, no question. And he was very clever. He says, that's fine, but come here first. And of course, I went there first. And it's interesting that as a child and growing up, I had had a recurring dream. The dream was very simple. I was in a car in the back seat. There was no driver in the front seat, but the car was being driven. And it took me out to a hot desert. There was a large rock, and the car stopped. And then behind this large rock, a man appears with dark skin and wearing a white skirt, what I called as a child a skirt, and a white top. And I knew that I had arrived. That's all the dream. I probably had this dream 20 times growing up. It would come in and out. So I arrive in Malakkara in 1968. Malakkara is a village in Kerala, South India, where this sage lives. He's a householder sage, by the way, meaning he has wife and children. And outside the house, around a tree, a man appears. And it's the same man from my dreams. So I don't know how to explain this, but I know that we call him Gurudev, was always there. So when I met him, there was no question that this was. So I went for 2 weeks to India, and I stayed 2 years. It was time for my husband to go back and teach. He had been appointed a professor by now. And I said, I have to stay. And by then I had a 2-year-old son. I think you'll see a photograph later of us. So I stayed on for a year when my husband went back to America. He came back, and I said, it's not finished. So he left me for another year, went back, and I stayed 2 years on that first trip with my teacher and his family. And I think I can honestly say that that became and is the foundation for everything in my life. My plan was to stay there the rest of my life because I thought creative life is a reach for the truth, for that we look for. And once you find that, you don't need the ladder anymore. So I had planned, I was in my 20s, and I said I planned to stay there the rest of my life, my early 20s. And after 2 years, my teacher gently nudged me out. He says, no, you've started something, you must go. And of course this whole teaching is not to sit in a corner and meditate, but to learn that the whole life is a meditation. And I think the hardest thing I ever did was leave. I fought terribly leaving because I said, I'll die if I leave. This is my whole life. And so I went from this tiny village, this protected shelter in India, to New York City to have a life as an actress. So can you imagine two extremes, And it was hard. But of course, it showed me the real teaching that the whole life is a meditation, And it's not a religion. It's not that this is the right way and that's the wrong way. It's very individual, the paths we choose. I would never say that my path is the only path. I would never take up arms and say, I will kill you if you don't believe in my path. I mean, the whole thing seems so archaic. I can't really grasp that in the 21st century we still have, some people have this mindset. So in that way my life has been blessed. But my work was, I think we all do things at different times, but I had built a penthouse in India when I was 23. I went very early and did, the practices there. So I had all these blissful states and experiences, but I hadn't built my first floor in my basement. And I thought I could leapfrog over that, and of course you can't. You have to go through all the stages. So I had to work on, realize that one has a body and a mind, and that you have to deal with psychology and the physical and health. And so, when I was a child, I would look at a table and I wouldn't see the form. I would see the energy, the molecules. And I would see people that way. That's why I could never tell you what someone looked like until I was after the age of 20, but I could tell you everything about that person inside. And someone would say, oh, what a handsome guy this is. And I'd say, no, he's very dark, he's very ugly. And then conversely, sometimes someone would say, well, he's not very attractive, but I would see a beautiful soul, because I would, So I had to learn to discover matter. We all have to learn something and do it in different order. I guess we only hope at the end of our span we've sort of integrated it, as Jung would say, and reached some sense of wholeness. So.
I think I'm just going to close this door here.
Yeah.
So you were saying about changing.
Yes,
changes
Vedanta.
in Vedanta.
I think in a nutshell, of course, there's one could spend hours discussing Advaita Vedanta, which is the Hindu philosophy behind Hinduism, but it has no God concept. It's talks about consciousness as a backdrop to life. But the key is not like to become a sannyasin or a monk or wear an ochre robe. My teacher used to say that it's not about changing the outside. It's about just changing your perspective. So if you're a housewife or mother or a carpenter or screenwriter or actor, whatever, you just change, you just shift from the ego to the higher consciousness. So you keep on doing what you did before, only you're doing it for a little different reasons. It becomes a spiritual exercise, which is what the word sadhana means, or spiritual work, rather than for fame or money or whatever. So it's an inner perspective shift is what is needed. It sounds so simple. Of course, you spend a lifetime trying to live what you know or were shown, But
in the work that you did at Pacifica, what were the things that you discovered in that study?
Rather than discovering new things, it was kind of a confirmation, because I had been doing Pacifica for 25 years, only I didn't know it. It's sort of like one thing amazing that's happening today, with all the chaos and the war and all the awful things, is that people are finding their tribe. I always think of this, what was this movie with the Spielberg movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. When the individual, quite average, ordinary people, suddenly they get this image of the mountain. And certain people know they have to go to this mountain. And so the people that are called kind of show up, unbeknownst to each other. And I think Pacifica's a little like that. I went there, and the exciting thing is that we ranged in age from 30 to 70 in the graduate school. We had a judge, a lawyer, artist, psychotherapist, in my case, screenwriter. We were like every ilk imaginable. And they would say, like I said too, I'm not sure why I'm here, but I know it's right. It feels right. And I'd hear this again and again and again. They had no idea what they were. In fact, my mother and other people would say, well, what are you going to do with a degree in mythology? It's not like a MBA or something. And what are you going to do with a degree in mythology? And I would say, it's not what I'm going to do with mythology, it's what mythology is going to do with me. And I think that's the shift that happened with me, and I've noticed with others. So Pacifica I had gone deep with my Indian philosophy and those training, and Pacifica helped me go wide, because our studies would include anthropology and folklore, psychology, and history, we were sort of across, and of course mythology of all the cultures in the world. So it helps see the interconnectedness, how everyone is striving to reach the same point in very different and colorful languages and forms. So it was confirming. Pacific, I think, was a confirmation. I would call it a graduate school with a soul. Even though I taught in graduate school, I used to say, be very critical of how graduate school is, taught, especially for creative people. I find it a little rigid and sterile. And I used to say, even to my graduate students, I'd say, beware of graduate school, because I think if Edison had gone to graduate school for a PhD, we'd never have the light bulb. In other words, you have to really keep the mind open. And there's a tendency for us to feel secure, to want to think it's this way or it's that way. And of course it's 1,000 ways.
Let's talk about Hollywood and its potential to become Hollywood.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm that much of an idealist anymore, Jeff.
Well,
but,
anyway, no, I mean, but just.
But I know
you
what you mean.
Your experience and
Yeah.
and any kind of the potential that you see.
Potential's definitely there, no question.
Yeah.
Of course, Hollywood's dominated by the bottom line, which is what makes money. So I think at the point Hollywood thinks it's socially responsible films, just like corporations, after Enron and all this, will realize to do the right thing might be financially viable. And I think we'll come to that. But I don't think it's going to be quickly. But the potential is there. I think film is the media of our time, no question. You know, in the days when one went to the theater or poets, you know, went to hear a poet, we go to movies like we go to temples today. I mean, observe people sitting in a dark movie theater. They just become quiet in anticipation. It's like opening themselves to a visitation, you know. And then what do they see? Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know. I always like to quote David Putnam, who is an English producer. He gave us Chariots of Fire and The Mission, some other films. He didn't make it in Hollywood because he did the films his heart told him to do, and they didn't make enough money. So the studios exiled him. He went back to England. But in an interview with Bill Moyers on public radio, he said once, if films could be what they should be, there'd be no need to go to church. And I always love that, because I think, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could serve by giving films that raise consciousness instead of films where you want to go out and you know, feel bad about the world or do away with yourself. I wrote for Touched by an Angel, as you know, the TV series. And I remember once Martha, our exec producer, telling me that they get a lot of mail, of course, but they got a letter from this guy who was planning to commit suicide. He had the television on, and Touched by an Angel came on this Sunday night. And he watched it, and he was so moved, he started crying, and he decided to give life a chance and not give up, and he wrote to us. And I thought, now Touched by an Angel's maybe a little more sentimental than, you know, my taste might be, but at least it does some good in the world. I think it serves in that way, and gives people hope, and that's not a bad thing, you know. So media can do that, and of course films can change a person's life. My son, who's a lawyer now, said, seeing Breaker Morant, the Australian film that Bruce Beresford directed, which is, I think, the best anti-war film I've ever seen, made him want to be a lawyer. So, you know, that changed this young man's life. So.
I remember, I think I told you the quote from Eleanor Perry, screenwriter. What? She said, film is such a miraculous medium, it belongs on the side of the angels. Oh,
beautiful. No, I didn't know that. Beautiful. Yeah. I've been quite outspoken about socially responsibility in Hollywood, or the lack of it, because I really feel strongly that that should go without saying, something we do, especially in the world today, when we've seen 9/11 in the trade towers. You know, there have been 2 or 3 movies before that happened about the same thing. And another example is Natural Born Killers, Oliver Stone's film. The week it came out, 2 young people in the Midwest randomly killed 3 people, and 3 strangers to them. And when they arrested and the policemen asked their names, they gave the names of the characters from the movie. So there's no question there's a connection between media and life. Hollywood excuses itself more often than not by saying, we just mirror what's out there. We mirror life. But life also mirrors media. And I think that's where those of us in the industry have to take a little responsibility. You know, what do we want mirrored in life?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a sense, it's like media basically is in a maintenance mode more than a liberation mode.
Media's in a making money mode, pure and simple. I mean, for the most part, the industry, that's what it's at. And they have this feeling that people want just more sex and violence. But, you know, my first film, The Christmas Wife, Jason Robards and Julie Harris, everyone said I'd never get it made. It's about 2 senior citizens, has no sex or violence in it. I said, not possible. Well, it not only got made, HBO made it, it got nominated for Best Picture, Writer, Actor, and Actress, and it had over 200 rave reviews. It didn't have one negative review. Now that tells you that people want something else. They want some alternative programming, you know, and that was very confirming for me. Now it's hard getting those. It's sometimes an uphill battle, because the other sells so much better. You know, Hollywood makes its money mostly from the back end, not from the sales in America. And the back end means third world countries. Are you beginning to see a connection? Think 911. Third world countries are the ones that like the Schwarzenegger, the very violent films. That's where they make their money. So we're feeding violence to third world countries that we may soon be billions having a war with. It's all interconnected in one. I'm not saying it's the only cause, of course. That would be naive. But it is a factor. And I'll get off remember I started out in theology, so I still have a little sense of mission and getting on my podium here, I guess.
Yeah, well, anyway, I think now you're getting close to beginning a project that hopefully will speak to this integration, the film, project that we talked about. So that's
yes, it's time to re-enter the fray. But there's something. I mean, graduate school was a sweet indulgence, to be in just that, to be able to. It's a little dangerous too, because you realize, part of me would rather think than teach, and part of me would rather read than write. So now I have to kind of shift gears. But life is amazing. Another amazing thing that I think is totally magical is that when you start out, in your teens or 20s, like I thought all my life I'd only want to be an actor. I couldn't imagine anything else. But how acting really paved the road for me to write dramatic plays and films, which is dramatic writing. And it all had to, so the interconnection's everywhere. Sometimes you don't know what you're doing, like why I'm still not sure exactly why I had to go to Pacifica, but I know it'll feed back into my teaching and writing. But that it's about listening to that inner voice that may seem a little touched by an angel, but it's there. And if we create the space and time and honor that voice, it will always tell us or guide us in some way the next step. And one lesson I had to learn, because we're living in a time of uncertainty, personally and collectively, the economy, what are people believing in, the government, and so on, is that you don't have to know the whole scenario. I used to feel I wanted to see 20 years ahead and know exactly what I was doing. That gave me a certain degree of security. And now this is a time of uncertainty. You just have to be true to each moment. There's the nowy part. But I think it's just knowing that, I'm supposed to do this now and honoring that. And somehow the next step will appear. And whoever you're supposed to meet will come into your life. We think we're orchestrating it. And of course the fact is it works best when we kind of get out of the way. I don't mean in the sense of lay down and sleep, but, it's an active passivity, I would say, an active waiting.
Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to include?
God, I mean, there's so many, it's hard to choose one, but I think authenticity, integrity, being true to your path, to what you're supposed to be doing at this moment, regardless of what the world seems to be saying or swaying. And it's amazing when you do that, how the helpers come and how you get the reinforcements. When I wrote that article in Pluto's Shadow 2 weeks after 9/11, that article that was published.
Excuse me 1 second.
I know.
Yeah.
2 weeks after 9/11, the Trade Tower, I remember trying to give blood, and finding out there was no need to give blood because there were no survivors. And that leaves you with this feeling like you have to do something. So I wrote that article that was published in Pluto's Shadow with the metaphor of the astrological placement of Pluto now, which is creating a lot of chaos and havoc. And the editor said, we're going to publish it, but you may receive hate mail, so just be careful, or phone calls. Because I started out by saying I refuse to fly an American flag. The only flag I will fly is a flag with the globe, the planet, on it. Because that old paradigm of patriotism has to fall away. We're one planet, and we need to, so on. And I did not receive one hate phone call, but I had strangers calling me and contacting me, people I didn't know, saying that's exactly how we feel, and we're so glad it was said. So I think it's very important to speak out. You think you're a marginalized single voice, but your sisters and brothers are out there, and they're and they realize what is what, and what is the way to go, and what is not, and I think the courage to be authentically each point, and if you have to say the emperor has no clothes in Washington, D.C. or anywhere else, I think it's time to say that. But I'm not so political by temperament usually. I think the main task, of course, is to spiritually find your path and go to the end of it. But by being true to that, offshoots might be, go into other arenas, like teaching or writing or like that. So. I should say also, Jeff, that anything I say is in terms of my own life. I would never say this is the way for anyone else to follow, because I think the seeds of our path are in us, and we just have to find what our authentic way is.
I wonder if you would share your experience in Cornwall.
Oh, yes. I think I remember that. That's from that article about changes I wrote. Okay. I had received several awards in New York as a playwright, in the NEA and different prizes and such. And something, the heart went out of me. There was a lot of pressure, of course. I went to Cornwall, England, and by myself, and just to walk the coastal paths, to try and replenish the well, so to speak, And it took a long time to get to the opening, and I walked up, and I was just at the point where I could see the ocean, and it was just, amazing, of course, windy and beautiful. And about 8 inches from my head, there was this thrush on a bush. And it just at that moment, when I saw the ocean, it opened its beak, and this huge melody came out that was much larger than this little bird. And I burst out crying. And the bird went on singing, didn't mind my crying, so this went on for a while. And what came up from me at this moment was, I want to write like that bird sings, not for critics, not for money, not for audiences or Broadway or whatever, but just because it's in the soul. It's natural for the bird to sing. And I think that's what I had lost along the way. It's easy to do. You start out loving writing, and it comes from that, and then you become a professional. And I think, so I often think of that bird. That's become a metaphor when I feel I'm getting away from the true. You know. Well, I may not say it exactly in the way I wrote it 2 years ago, but one of the things my teacher, Sri Adwayananda, would say was that obstacles become means. We have a tendency when an obstacle comes to think it's a negative thing, when it really could be the bridge to something truly splendid. And when I had the heat stroke in India, which kind of knocked me out for a while, it started that deeper journey, what I call my underworld journey, where I had to go deeper. And one shift has happened is that, I mentioned earlier about a time of uncertainty, is that I realize I no longer need to know what we call the future. It's an illusion anyway, future, because whatever we think it will be, it never is. And what if change is a vehicle of transformation? I've also discovered that I think life is about the evolution of the soul, and that the soul will create what it needs for its own growth. Now that could be illness, that could be bankruptcy, that could be good things as well. I mean, it can be all kinds of things, but from the soul's viewpoint, there's not a positive, negative. It's just what it needs for its growth, what it needs for the individual to learn the lessons they need to know to deepen and hasten the evolution of the soul. So what if we looked at life in that way, the old paradigms of what is successful and what is that go out the window? Because I realize in this period I haven't been as active in Hollywood as before. I feel I'm a little more integrated, more whole, more human. It's like I've reclaimed my humanity and not just been a workaholic going toward a goal. So, you know, you have to redefine what success is. Suddenly it's something else. So I think change is a way to transform and something we should welcome and let go of the notion that we have to know tomorrow. If we're fully in today, fully in the present, and really surrender to it with all our heart, it will carry us. And it will carry us better than our will do the job. And then life becomes an adventure of the best kind. And I think that's what interests me more than one more thing to put on my resume. Yeah.
Well, I think that sounds like a good conclusion.
Okay.
And
So.
Thank you very much for your time and thoughts. And
Good.
I'll take some stills.
Thank you. Okay.
Good.
Good.
Okay.
Okay. This is Sri Atmananda, the guru of Raja Rao and the one who influenced Joseph Campbell. This is Sri Adwayananda, the son and disciple of Sri Atmananda, and this is...
I'm just going to get one more of this closer.
It's Catherine Ann Jones in India during her sadhana years, and her son Christopher Rama Rao. It's Catherine Rao, or Catherine Ann Jones, during her acting years in New York. This is after. It's Catherine as Cassandra in The Trojan Women, off-Broadway, New York.
Oh, that's all right. Go ahead.
It's Catherine married to Raja Rao. And I think one last. That reflects. It's Catherine Ann Jones today.